a conversation engaging many of you in the audience, and both take questions and ask you questions. And so we hope to make this something of an interactive conversation about a topic that we all very much care about. I think Dan is going to give me a clue about we're set and ready to go. So apparently we are streaming live now, and I'm just rambling. My name is Mark Lloyd. I am the director of the Media Policy Initiative at the New America Foundation. Prior to that, I was serving as Mike Kopp's assistant. I was an associate general counsel at the FCC and a chief diversity officer. And it may be for that reason that the folks at Free Press conspired to suggest that on a topic about media diversity, it might be good to have me moderate. Just very briefly, my background is I was a broadcast reporter and producer, worked at NBC and CNN for a little while. After that, I became a lawyer representing lots of communications companies, both public and commercial. After that, I started working as an advocate. Served for a short time as a general counsel at the Benton Foundation. I think Charles Benton is here in the building somewhere, and he can talk about the work of the Benton Foundation. Started my own little group. Did some research for a little while for the FCC when Bill Kennard was running it, and they were doing something that we called Adirondack studies. That was a while back. And then went to MIT and continued to do some research and taught and wrote a book and conspired with my friends at Free Press and Bob McChesney. If there's one recommendation that I would make to you, if you have not gotten a copy of Bob's new book, please get it and read it. It is really, I think, the best book that he has done, and a very good set of conceptual frames and arguments and evidence about where we are today and why. So strongly recommend Bob's book.
It's free here.
It's free? Wow.
Free Press books, it's free.
It's more you can say for Ben Scott's book, so which I think Ben's book is maybe back there somewhere. Good to see a number of friends here in the audience. This is, in many ways, a conversation that we've been having at Free Press since the start of Free Press. I am not going to bore you with the statistics about the decline of journalism or about the challenges in media monopoly or consolidation. If you are interested in that, I'm happy to sort of give you my opinion about those things toward the end. But what I would like to try to emphasize before I introduce the other presenters is simply to say that this is not a conversation about the past. It's not a conversation about old media or legacy media. It is not a conversation even so much about the present. It is a conversation very much about the future. We have this tendency, and it's hard to get away from it, to divide or to sort of put in silos all these categories of media and think that somehow they're different. When Rupert Murdoch purchases the Wall Street Journal and runs a major website and runs satellite operations and cable operations globally, when he invests in broadcast operations, he's not thinking of broadcast media as this independent thing that we don't have to worry about. He understands that they are all connected and that they all have an impact on how the public thinks and what the public thinks about. It is important for us to begin to think in the same way. The battles over consolidation and diversity in the media are also battles over consolidation and diversity regarding the internet, regarding telecommunication services, regarding almost every way that we communicate, using the public airwaves or using the public alleys and streets by which we get cable, through almost every mechanism. All these things are connected. One of the bits of work that I did at the FCC that I'll talk just a tiny bit about was a bit of work that was actually started by a representative who just passed away, Cardis Collins, from Chicago, who in some ways sort of assumed a seat as a member of Congress after her husband died an untimely death. She was a very shy woman who wasn't quite sure where to find her place, but inspired by Ebony Magazine and the Chicago Defender in Chicago, she decided that she was going to focus on trying to make sure that women and minorities were better represented in media, all media. And so she fought in the late 80s and early 90s for something that ultimately became Section 257 of the 1996 Telecommunications Act. She fought for that and also for another part of the 96 Act that was about telecommunications development fund, using the spectrum actually to fund entrepreneurs to become engaged in digital media. Believe it or not, there was a part of the Telecommunications Act that put aside spectrum monies to fund private parties to actually be involved in the telecommunications industry. There were actually a couple of efforts along those lines, but the Telecommunications Development Fund actually made it into the Act. Cardis Collins fought for that. She fought for 257. 257 was a compromise. It wasn't exactly what she wanted. What she wanted was clear, established policies to promote greater participation among women and minorities in the industry, in both the broadcast industry, but also in the emerging telecommunications and internet industries. And she wanted that. She thought that we knew enough, that we could see the statistics of the level of disparity of participation among those groups, and that something needed to be done about this immediately, that we didn't wait. They need to wait to find out more. But 1992 brought a new Congress, and 94 changed all that. And she settled for a set of compromises. And the compromise was Section 257. And that section requires the Federal Communications Commission to identify market entry barriers and to propose regulations to address those market entry barriers. Bill Kennard used Section 257 to justify what were then called Adirondack studies, to justify studies looking at discriminatory practices in media that limited diversity throughout media, in telecommunications and broadcasting, in internet, in radio, in almost every sort of media you could imagine. My little organization was actually funded to do a study that we ended up calling When Being Number One Is Not Enough, looking at discriminatory advertising practices and the impact that had on people who wanted to target services to minority audiences. That was funded because of Cardis Collison's work in 257. 257 was an extraordinarily powerful tool giving the FCC the power to actually investigate what was going on in communities, whether or not all Americans had the opportunity to participate in the telecommunications industry, particularly the new industries Cardis was concerned about. In 2002, Michael Powell, my former classmate at Georgetown, with some help from folks in the General Counsel's office, reinterpreted Section 257 to mean that it was going to be an examination of regulatory barriers, not market entry barriers, but an examination of what regulations were in place that were stifling the brave entrepreneurs of the new telecommunications industries. And the Office of Communications and Business Development, which had been established essentially to make sure that 257 was moving forward, was essentially gutted. And what they began to do was to collect a list of things that they had done throughout the FCC to eliminate various regulations that were imposing great burdens on business. That's what became of Cardis Collins's work. Certainly not at all what she intended. So when I went to the FCC, when I talked to Julius in the very early days about whether or not I would even go to the FCC, I said something needs to be done to change the way that we do this. I know that people don't want to put policies in place to really sort of promote women and minorities because you're concerned that those policies are going to be thrown out by the courts. Because you don't have a compelling governmental interest and you haven't done the research to do a narrow tailoring of a policy to address the interests. So, Joel just said, yes, we're a data-driven agency. We want to find this information out. We want to go out and find what's really happening in communities. And so we developed a way to think about this. One was to see if we could figure out what were the critical information needs facing the diverse American public. I mean, were there needs that were so critical that all Americans really needed to understand what was going on? And were those needs, was the information being communicated? And we funded the USC Annenberg program, working with a variety of other scholars, to do a literature review on the critical information needs of the American public. Added on to that was to understand whether there were market entry barriers that may have an impact on whether those needs were being delivered or met. And we came up with a phenomenal set of reports over a relatively short period of time that we got a lot of support from people like Derek Turner at Free Press and a number of other people who contributed to that bit of work. We even got Commissioner Copps to agree that this was a decent way to proceed as we move forward on the work. We moved so far as to get this work done, and you can actually see it on the FCC website. It was not something that the chairman spent a lot of time focusing on, did not promote it as much as he did Steve Waldman's work on what became the information needs. We were looking at critical information needs. Critical information needs are emergency broadcasting services that not only give you warnings, but do you actually know where to go if you hear the warning? Do you trust the information about getting the inoculation if there's a disease? Do you know where to go if there's a hurricane or a tornado or fire raging in your community? Are you getting information in your community that tells you this? Are your broadcasters providing you that information? Are your local newspapers providing you with that information? Are you getting that information over social media? Whatever the media is, are Americans getting this critical information needs? Well, the evidence suggests that by and large those needs are really not being well met, but more study needs to be done. So we pulled together a design meeting, pulled together a wide range of folks who were looking at how to do research, and we put together a comprehensive, practical design to actually figure out what was going on in local communities and whether or not the diverse American public was getting its critical information needs met, and whether there were market entry barriers. And that's where it ended. We thought we actually had the money. Commissioner Copps may tell you a story about that, but we actually thought we had the money dedicated to actually conduct these studies, because that's what the FCC, I think, at a minimum, is supposed to do. Isn't it supposed to try to understand what's really going on in communities and how its policies have an impact on those communities, and whether or not, before they change the rules, they understand the impact of the policies? Well, the fact of the matter is monies were not allocated, the studies have not been done, and I spent roughly 3 years at the FCC, not only being attacked by Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh, right? A tiny bit of a badge of honor, happy to bear those scars, but not getting the work that I thought I was actually hired as a lawyer, not appointed by President Obama, hired as a lawyer to get done. And that's where we stand. Right now, we are facing threats at the FCC regarding the FCC's authority to regulate telecommunication services, including what Michael Powell reclassified as information services. Does the FCC have the power to determine what is in the public interest regarding how the telecommunications and the cable companies provide you internet service? The courts will make some decision about that right now because the current chairman did not reclassify information services as telecommunication services. The current chairman did not meet the requirements laid out by the Third Circuit to actually perform studies to determine whether or not some work that the FCC needed to do about diversity was sufficient or required. The FCC's authority regarding media is, I think, understandably under attack because they simply haven't done the basic work that they need to do to find out what needs to be found out about what's going on with local communities. It's not much more complicated than that. If activists, if concerned citizens in your own communities, if you do not gather information about what's going on in your communities, if you wait for the federal government to gather that information and tell you whether or not broadband is being deployed in your area, or whether or not your critical information needs are being met, or whether or not the broadcasters are operating in the public interest, you will be waiting for a very long, long time. I would suggest that it is up to us to gather this information on our own. Perhaps we can gather some foundation support. Perhaps we can get some information that we need so that we can make the case and make the argument and get an FCC that will actually put in regulations and say, here's the evidence that you need to justify the work that we are requiring needs to be done. Perhaps we can push members of Congress to honor the late Cardis Collins and her wishes and hopes for Section 257. But we've got a long way to go. This is not a conversation about the past. This is not a conversation about the present. This is a conversation about what do we need to do to protect our future, whether that future is over the internet, whether it's over a combination of the internet and broadcast, whether it is a combination of a wide variety of social media and print media and everything else. We need to find a way to own our information about what's happening in our own media environments, tell government we know this is what's happening. And one of the great advantages of the internet today is that we have the ability to join together as a collective mind, to share information, and to be able to say this is what we know is going on, and to challenge government when it suggests otherwise. That's my speech. We do hope to have a conversation with a group of presenters that I think we are all honored, and I am honored to share a stage with them. Friends of mine, many of them, just sort of, that's what happens when you get old and you have gray hair. You end up gathering lots of folks, and hopefully they're friends, and more friends than enemies, I would have to say out there. Michael Copps, who literally needs no introduction. The favorite thing about Michael Copps that always inspires me is the fact that he was like Ben Scott, a student of history and someone who understands the importance of our past, but very much focused on the future, and was, I think, the only commissioner to vote against both media mergers across a wide range of things, as well as some of the reports that came out of the FCC while he was there. Sitting next to Michael Copps, I'm sorry, this is Michael Copps. Sitting next to Michael Copps is Jason Legria, who is with the Asian American Justice Center. The Asian American Justice Center and Jason have been working for years on trying to make Americans aware of things such as the model minority myth and the importance of trying to understand what's actually happening with Asian American communities. And so we are very fortunate to have Jason come in and talk with us today. Bernie Lunzer, sitting next to Jason Legria. Bernie is the head of the Newspaper Guild. The Newspaper Guild is an organization that, going back to the early 1900s, really established what it meant to be a practicing journalist in this country. They fought for rules. They fought for not only wages, which you would expect for, for unions, but they also tried to help journalists understand how to be a very good, responsible journalist in the range of times. And Bernie has been, I think, a fierce advocate for the Newspaper Guild, and it's also with Communications Workers of America. And so we're really honored to have Bernie present a perspective of working journalists and as distinct from the newspaper industry, and to talk about what media diversity means. And then my good friend Chanel Hardy, who has done so many different things in a number of different areas, both with, I think, Consumers Union, and later on with a member of Congress we shall not name, and is now a leader at the National Urban League, and Joe Torres, who is a fierce and articulate voice for both working journalists, but also all minorities and marginalized communities in this country. I strongly urge that you read Joe's book as well, News for All the People. And we're really, I think, lucky to have this panel of presenters. And I will ask them all to get up one after the other and speak more briefly than I did to you. And to see if we can, after that, have a conversation and then take some questions from the audience. And so let me start with my cops. But applause for all the panelists, please.
Thank you and good morning. I am delighted to be here. This is always my favorite of any conference, anywhere. It's going to be a wonderful 3 days. I see a lot of old friends out there. I'm delighted to see again, and hope to make some new ones too. Mark told me we had 2 or 3 minutes. I think I'm probably constitutionally incapable of speaking for just 2 minutes on a subject as broad as consolidation and diversity and how to change the media. A lot of folks here, I think, probably have some idea of where I stand already. So I can be very brief on consolidation. I think consolidation destroyed a lot of small businesses, killed a lot of jobs, stifled competition, shut minorities and women out of full participation in media ownership, put the screws to investigative journalism, put a lot of reporters out on the streets, and in the final analysis contributed a lot to the dumbing down of our civic dialogue in the United States of America today, and I don't think we really can deny that we have experienced exactly that over recent years. A lot of the blame for this goes to the private sector and the media moguls and the financial and business plans that they had. But I think we all know there was a co-conspirator in wreaking all of this havoc on our news and information infrastructure, on our media ecosystem, if you will, and that was the abdication of public policy oversight. For those of you who like to name names, the Federal Communications Commission, where I worked for over a decade. And with regard to the subjects we're talking about today, I think the FCC is guilty of 3 capital sins. Sin number 1 has been blessing and thereby encouraging almost every media merger and acquisition to come before it in recent years. Sometimes it seems that that's all that I did there, that the only job before me was one proposal after another for mergers and acquisitions and more, and one company's in getting its approved, and as soon as they're out the door, the next one is coming in saying, oh, you let that guy get too large, so now you have to, and we just, not me, but the commission majority, blessed it all and encouraged it all. Sin number 2 has been the elimination of public interest oversight, things like licensing guidelines for broadcast stations. We don't have a legitimate, real licensing process anymore. It used to be that every 3 years you had to come in and make some kind of a plausible case that you were serving the public interest. Today you send in a postcard, and usually by return mail or not too long after that, you will receive your license, no questions asked. Sin number 3, turning a blind eye to minorities and diversity communities and refusing to act on a whole spate of proposals to fix the situation that have been pending before the Commission for years and years and years. And nobody worked harder on this than Mark when he was there, and I was privileged to work with him, saying, why don't we take these proposals and vote them up or down? They all seem to have disappeared in somebody's desk drawer. And meanwhile, we live in a country, now over a third minority, in a country that will be, the minorities will be a majority by the middle of this century, and racial minorities own, get this, of the full power commercial television stations in the United States of America, racial minorities own 2.2%. How's that for reflecting the diversity of America? It's pretty sad. It's very, very sad. Diversity of viewpoint, diversity of news, diversity of content, all are related and all depend, in my mind, on diversity of ownership. Minorities, women, other diversity organizations. Of the disappointments I had at the Federal Communications Commission, this is the one I consider the most tragic and the most inexcusable. We've got facts and figures. We need more. You always need more. But we need action. What we need the further research for is really, if you want to do something in a race-conscious kind of proactive way, so you have legal justification. But there are things we can do short, not we, that the FCC could do short of that specifically race-conscious approach that would have a positive effect. Things like incubators and making sure minorities get spectrum and enforcing EEO and maybe having a set-aside for independent programs, a whole raft of things we can do. So I said to the chairman, why don't we just take these 70 or 80 proposals and vote one a month, vote it up or down, just vote it and get it done. Hasn't happened. And I think it's a tragedy, I really do. I think it's a terrible mark. And if there was one thing I could change with the stroke of a wand, I think it would be doing something about building media justice. There's that old saying that justice delayed is justice denied. That applies right here. Media justice delayed to our minorities is justice denied. Some will say, well, you're just talking, you're hung up, you're an old timer, you're just talking about radio and television and cable, but as Mark said, we've got one media ecosystem. Part of it is new media. I love new media. We all love new media. We all depend upon new media. It is not on autopilot to create a golden age of media for the United States of America. It still has no model for resource-intensive journalism to support the kind of jobs and reporters' time and bureaus around the state and around the country and around the world that we had in traditional media. And truth be told, most of the news we get in new media, most of the news you'll all read today on the internet, 95% of it, according to Alex Jones at Harvard University, still comes from where? The newspaper newsroom and the TV newsroom. The problem is there is so damn much less of it because of all of the consolidation that we have been through, and that's why I talk as I do about the demise of investigative journalism and the dumbing down of our democratic dialogue. So those of us who believe in the new media, we've got a lot of heavy lifting to do to find those incentives that will create real news and investigative journalism, that will make sure the internet stays open, that will make sure that broadband is even available across the country. We won't get into that here, but it's an integral solution. There's a lot of work to be done, and a significant part of that work can be done right now without waiting for the President of the United States to make a legislative proposal and without waiting for Congress to pass a law. We can start to put the brakes on consolidation with the next merger transaction proposal that comes through the door of the FCC. The FCC has legislative authority right now, today, to demand full disclosure of who's supporting all of those ads, who's backing up, who's financing all those super PAC, anonymous, negative political ads that we were subjected to over the course of the 2012 campaign. Section 317 has been in the Telecommunications Law before the Telecommunications Act of 1934. It goes back into the 1920s. 3 votes of the FCC could update the rules so they can deal with the PACs and the super PACs and all the new avenues of dark money that have been invented since the Commission last visited its authority. But it has the authority. And we need to push. We can do this right now. What a step that would be to show everybody in this room that, yes, it is possible to get reform, even in the area of money in politics. And we can do it now, and we don't have to wait for Congress to act. We could do right now some of these things that Mark worked so hard on and that I talked about before for minorities and for female ownership. The list goes on and on, you know. Maybe we could even make that place a consumer protection agency, like I think it maybe was intended to be in the first place. A new chairman, or maybe even a chairwoman, at the FCC could make a big difference. Could make a big difference. And that's up to us, well, it's up to the President to nominate such a person, and it's up to us to try to bring some pressure right now that the President nominates a person who still has some fire in the belly for the public interest, who's dedicated to doing some of these things that you and I know to be done. Wouldn't require change of character because the President, as a candidate, as a senator, ran on some of these things. I've got files in my home with letters from Barack Obama as a senator, statements that he made as a candidate saying we shouldn't be encouraging consolidation of media until we really understand the impact of these rules changes on diversity and on minorities, and we need to reaffirm the public interest. So we need to call upon him now in the second term to start to redeem some of those promises to keep. 46 groups went on record just yesterday. Amazing number of public interest groups and civil rights groups and disability groups and other diversity groups with a letter to the White House basically laying out the need to have a public interest commission led by a public interest chairman. And any pressure that can be brought to that or added to that, I think would be absolutely fantastic. I don't want to get into a situation where some of these organizations get a call from the White House and say, we've got this wonderful new candidate, won't you put out a statement endorsing him or her for the chairmanship of the FCC? What we need up front when the President makes that nomination is his statement saying, I'm looking to this new chairman or chairwoman to do boom, boom, boom. And then we need to make sure that that nominee during the confirmation process really believes that in his or her heart. So yes, there's lots to do. There are legislative things to do. We can talk about a lot of that. But I just want to make the point that there are things that we can be doing right now, that we should be doing right now, and that we don't have time to ignore any longer. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Jason to come up, but let me just make a very brief note. Note cards, I think, were passed out early on, and there'll be folks going up and down the aisles. If you've got questions, comments that you want to make, please pass your note cards down to the end of the aisle. People will pick those up and make sure they get to me, and we'll begin to make sure we can get some questions to folks here on the panel. Jason?
Morning, everybody. First, I'd like to thank Free Press for giving me the opportunity to speak to everyone here today for this conference. It's a really great honor. Actually, my boss, President and Executive Director of the Asian American Justice Center, Mi Mua, was originally supposed to speak here today, but unfortunately, we're taking the battle for immigration reform in DC, and she had called into a separate meeting. So unfortunately, she couldn't make it today. So AJC is, for those of you who don't know, is a national civil rights organization based in Washington, D.C., and we advance the human and civil rights for Asian Americans and other underserved communities to build a fair and equitable society for all. We advance the interests of 18 million Asian Americans in this country, and we're actually the fastest growing racial group in this country as of the 2010 census. So as you heard Commissioner Kopp say, minorities own very few full power stations. Asians own less than 1% of full power TV, full power radio. But what I want to say is that it's not just about the numbers of owning these stations. And you might be wondering why a civil rights group is here speaking at this conference and this panel today. But it's not just about the numbers. For civil rights groups, we are multi-issue organizations representing constituents, actual people on the ground. And we have to examine their interests from the viewpoints of jobs, employment, investment, health, and even our own safety. And that's why diversity in the media is very important for our organization. We've been doing this work for over 20 years. We've signed memorandums of understandings with all the networks. We've been active in different deals and just advocating for increasing diversity in this industry. And for the Asian American community, we face two common themes in today's society. One is that these stereotypes you have of Asian Americans. We like to think we're American, but there's so many stereotypes out there that perpetuate us as being foreigners. You think of Asian Americans, you might think, oh, men are just kung fu masters, or engineers, or nerds, and really rich and highly educated. And for part of that, that's true. There are a lot of Asians here who came because they were educated, and they came to this country. But there are a lot of other Asian Americans from Southeast Asia, for example. They're refugees. They came here with nothing. All they know how to do is farm. And now they're here in America, and they have higher poverty rates than African Americans, lower high school graduation rates than anyone else. Same thing in education. You hear about a lot of Asian Americans in Ivy League schools. Most Asian Americans, they go to community college, state college. Those are the stories and stereotypes that pervade us as Asian Americans. And what this really happens is, I was at a law firm before I joined AJC, and I looked around the first day, and basically every partner there was white. And I was one of the few people of color in the office. And that's when it really hit me in the face that these people, they had this expectation based on what the stereotypes they saw in the media and everything else they've seen in society. They thought I was just going to be a hard worker, keep my nose down, and just do hard work and nothing else. Same thing in government policies and resources. If the government only thinks of us as really successful group of people, they don't have that interest to make sure their policies serve all members of America and dedicate the money and resources to make sure that members of our community who aren't doing as well get service too. Another thing is that Asian Americans are an invisible minority. I know yesterday Roger Ebert passed away, and in the Asian American community, in the blogospheres and social media, it blew up about him. Because about 10 years ago, there was this movie that came out called Better Luck Tomorrow, made by some guy, Justin Lin, who did all the Fast and Furious movies. And it was a groundbreaking movie. It starts off with these Asian American teenagers in California, and they're the stereotypical kids. They're smart, get straight A's, well off, but then they start doing drugs and start drinking and partying, and then they end up killing one of their own friends. And it was just this really dark, but in-your-face, challenging movie about what you really thought Asian Americans were like. So at Sundance Festival, someone in the audience said to the cast and the filmmakers, how can you make such an immoral movie about yourselves? You made a story that was so negative about yourselves. And Roger Ebert stood up and he said, I find it very offensive and condescending about your statement. Is nobody would say to a bunch of white filmmakers, how can you do this to your own people? This film has to be a right to be about these people, and Asian American characters have the right to be whoever the hell they want to be. And I think that's really what media diversity is all about. It's about, our community telling the stories about ourselves. Today there's this whole immigration debate, and it is such a Hispanic issue. That's how the news covers it. But little do you know, there's like hundreds of thousands of Asian Americans who are also caught up in the immigration system. And that story is almost never told. There are Asian Americans who are waiting over 20 years to come over to this country, and that story is never told. Again, and that would be helped by having more diversity in our communities. Also, like emergencies, Hurricane Katrina, Superstorm Sandy. After these storms, in Louisiana, there are Vietnamese fishermen communities left in the dark. Because many Asian Americans can't speak English. Without radio, TV speaking to those communities, they didn't know what was going on. Same thing with Superstorm Sandy in New York. Bangladeshi communities, they had to reach out to people halfway across the country to find out information in their language. That's why we need more diversity in our ownership. Finally, I'll also just say it's about hate speech. That's something that I know a lot of the other civil rights groups deal with in our communities. Asian Americans have for a long time been subject to discrimination and hate crimes. The Asian American civil rights community and the movement didn't really start till the 80s, when there was someone named Vincent Chin who was murdered in Detroit. I don't know if anyone's heard of him. But he was a Chinese-American guy, just like me. And one night, he wanted to go celebrate his getting married, so he had a bachelor party at a strip club. And he ended up getting in a fight and getting murdered by these two Detroit auto workers. And they killed him because he thought he was Japanese. And at the time, they were blaming Japanese automakers for stealing jobs from Americans. And that really got the Asian American movement going. That, we're all in this together. Even though we're Japanese, Korean, Filipino, whatever, in the end, we all get lumped in together. And, this still happens today. Whether it's anti-China remarks, or you see movies with bad guys from Asia, and people go to Twitter the next day saying, oh, I want to kill all Asians now. That's what, for civil rights, it's all these different issues that come into play. It's not just about the numbers. It's really about, our investment in our communities and even our own safety, and just making sure that we are considered as Americans in society. So I'll just leave it at that, but I'm really happy to be here and glad to share my thoughts later on some of the more regulatory issues.
Greetings and good morning. I'm Bernie Lunzer with the Newspaper Guild, very pleased to represent practitioners of journalism. I want to talk to you this morning very briefly about, I want to confirm the crisis, talk about why it matters, and then how we at least start to build a road forward, as many of the speakers have talked about, and why a social justice movement still matters, and how it can be an antidote to what's going on. First of all, we're in either the 7th or 8th year of the crisis for American journalism, depending on how you measure it. That has seen the loss of easily over 40,000 journalists in the United States alone. The numbers may be as high as 50,000. It has meant the loss of many publications. Even this week we get news that the Cleveland Plain Dealer, despite our efforts to stop it, is moving to a 3-day distribution, as did the Times-Picayune, also owned by the same company, in New Orleans. So what we continue to see is a meltdown of the media industry, and however you might feel about the people I represent, sometimes we get attacked as the lamestream media, the mainstream media, all those wonderful things you hear. Here's what I would submit to you, is that the coverage that we represented, whether you agreed with some of it, it's just simply gone. And in the environment, the ecosystem, as you heard it referred to, of journalism, sometimes you just need those things even to respond to. It's a place that bounces around. But due to the beauty of the web, we're able to respond to things. I can tell you categorically that there's so many school boards, courts, city halls, beats, we call them beats, that are no longer covered, period. Amen, gone. Now, as I do talking about the splendor of the web, that there are some really wonderful things that are coming forward in journalism and in media to replace some of the things, the traditional media, and we're working in those areas as much as we do in the traditional sphere, because we know that there's a major change here. Here's the problem. that new ecosystem is not coming up quick enough to replace what is being lost. And I submit to you that we cannot sit back and assume that it's just going to magically happen by itself. There is, even within progressives, an idea of creative destruction, that somehow or other this is a magical period, we'll just sit through the meltdown and all these new splendid things will come up to replace the things that have been lost. I think that's a fantasy, and I hope you don't accept that as the way forward. As a union, and you heard Mark talk about this, we are proud of our legacy supporting Martin Luther King and the March on Washington. Some unions didn't. But being part of getting women in newsrooms, into sales as well as newsrooms, to try to create a media that reflects the society that it covers. And I would submit to you that a media that does not reflect that society it has no value whatsoever. I'm telling you that it doesn't exist right now for the most part. We know, and we haven't done the reports that show it, but in the current losses within newsrooms that now have newsrooms at 1/3, often 1/3 the size of where they were even 10 years ago, women have left quite quickly. We're not sure why. I have my own theory that women have more self-respect, don't want to stay in the sweatshop environment of what the newsrooms are right now. But we've also lost many people of color. And the Guild has worked hard to make sure that our layoff provisions don't add to that. And you know, we fought hard to get diversity, and now we see it being lost. It's serious, it's real, it's happening, and it's happening in the coverage as well. So we do want to move forward. We do want to be part of the broader social justice movement to try to find a way forward. I would tell you that we're sponsoring the new Brownout report. It's not ready yet, but we expect that it will show that the coverage of Latinos in the media is as bad as ever. We just put out a report a couple of days ago that shows that unions are incredibly, surprise, surprise, marginalized in the mainstream press. There is just so much that you're not getting, and it's hard oftentimes to talk about things that are not there. But that really is kind of the core issue right now. It's the things that aren't there that sort of matter in this period of crisis. So I do want to be part of this dialogue. I'm really pleased to be part of this panel. I think we can do better. I'd leave you with this, that check your cynicism and your ideology at the door. For those people that are here this weekend, let's talk about problem solving. Let's talk about ways forward. People like John Nichols have shown us and reminded us time and time again that many things have been done in terms of policy over the years to create a vibrant media in America. Those things can happen again. It's not going to happen right now in the private sector unless something really radically changes. We need to care about this. We need to be active. And I think the future is here if we stay constructive and we stay together and we fight as one social justice movement. So thank you. Now, those are my comments.
Good morning, everyone. I was one of those people for most of my life that had no idea that media policy had anything to do with my life. As I looked back on it, I realized that my parents did. They never let my sisters or I watch anything other than The Cosby Show until we were in high school, at which point we were allowed to watch The Cosby Show and A Different World. And I look back at that and I say, that's the reason that as a woman, we have all of those types of things that we don't like about ourselves, but never for one day of my life was I ever desirous of being anything but brown. And that is an achievement that I can never stop thanking my parents for. But they had to make a decision. The TV was off in our house. And so when I came to Consumers Union after law school and got to work for Gene Kimmelman, he gave me this little project, this thing I'd never heard about, a la carte cable, and said, this might be something that could help improve minority programming, access to minority-focused programming. Go find out about it, talk to civil rights groups about it, and that's why I'm really here today. So I want to start out by thanking Free Press for having me here. I'm very pleased to be part of such an illustrious panel. And I also was remembering and speaking to Mark earlier, the last time I was at this conference was in 2007. I was actually invited to be part of the Ron H. Brown media delegation as part of a group of civil rights activists to analyze the conference from that perspective. And at that point, I was fairly critical about what I saw as a condescending and privileged attitude toward the civil rights community around matters of media and telecommunications policy. So I'm very gratified to see that Free Press has brought folks like Joe and Chance into the fold, and that Mark is moderating today's panel. And because I was introduced to these issues at Consumers Union, and I now run the policy office of one of the, I think we say we're the largest African-American civil rights organizations in the country, I thought it was important to start by providing an introduction to our work and how we approach this work. The National Urban League is 103 years old, and we were founded during the Great Migration of African-Americans from the South in search of jobs, housing, and safety. If you have not read The Warmth of Other Suns, you should. It's the great migration story of African Americans. We're just like everybody else in America, moving for opportunity. Our leaders include such greats as Whitney M. Young, whose story is being told in a recently released documentary called The Power Broker. And unlike the NAACP, which was founded several months earlier, our organization is focused on serving the needs of our community through the achievement of economic parity and civil rights. We recognize that in a capitalist society, our communities will never be empowered and self-actualized as long as they require assistance for mere survival. Our goal is to ensure that all who want to work can, because they have the proper education and training, and because racial discrimination does not reduce their opportunity. Our goal is for all Americans to have access to good and affordable housing, quality and affordable health care, and an excellent education. We therefore approach our civil rights work in two ways, and this is where I'm just anticipating the provocative turn that the conversation could take. The second way is by serving as a powerful supporter and coalition member on traditional civil rights issues: voting rights, affirmative action, discrimination. The primary way, however, is providing direct services in communities: job training and placement programs, Head Start, community health workers, digital literacy, financial literacy, pre-purchase and foreclosure prevention counseling. Therefore, our approach to policy always happens through a lens of economic parity. What does this mean for telecom and media work? It means that we oppose relaxation of rules designed to prevent media consolidation at the expense of media minority ownership, even though we acknowledge that maintaining the status quo is not exactly a solution. That's why we organized a meeting with traditional telecom policy organizations and our close colleagues at the National Council of La Raza, the Asian American Justice Center, and the NAACP to clarify our position last year, which had been misrepresented about relaxation of the cross-ownership rule before the commission, and why we sent a letter to the FCC to ensure that the message was clear. For some reason, we continue to be misunderstood, but we continue to call and to make the record straight. But that's also why we came to the bargaining table with Comcast and NBC when it became clear that a merger was likely imminent. We cannot afford to make the perfect the enemy of the good, and the agreement that our principals signed sought improvements in the way these companies handled supplier diversity, which is critical for our entrepreneurs, employment diversity, which is critical for a population that today is still, and we just did a retrospective as it's a 50th anniversary year, African Americans are still twice as likely as white Americans to be unemployed regardless of education, experience, or where we live. Content diversity, as we've talked about a lot, diversity in governance, and access for independently owned programming. And that's also why our affiliates partner with companies like Comcast to promote their Internet Essentials program, which was required as a merger condition and which is designed to make broadband, computers, and digital literacy training available to our most vulnerable citizens. As we seek to move forward to promote minority ownership, I just want to make a couple of quick points, and I'll save some others for later. One important point is that civil rights groups are deeply in need of financial support of foundations and individuals to engage in this work deeply and consistently. Because we are civil rights groups and our first item of work is not telecom and media policy, we are often not considered to be experts, and as a result, we are too often consigned to the sign-on role, which is not a role that our principals are willing to accept on behalf of our communities. We also need the support of the telecom and media policy community on our issues. Our relationship cannot and will not be limited to signing on, and that means practically we look forward to enthusiastic support from telecom policy organizations for things like proactive steps to promote minority ownership and diversity in the field. And I've really seen an improvement in this in recent years. Civil rights groups also do and have been doing meaningful and needed work in our communities for many years. We have been around a lot longer than the media reform movement. We've been fighting stereotypes of people of color that even today send us to prison, reduce our access to loans, restrict access to jobs and raises, and even impact our health. We appreciate the work that this community does, and we ask to be approached in the spirit of mutual respect and collaboration. We all recognize that our country is stuck in a morass of ugly partisan deadlock. There is nothing that we want to accomplish that can get done right now. It takes power to break gridlock. Money power, which we don't have, or people power, which we do have. But the so-called Obama coalition must be careful not to rest on the laurels of what we achieved in 2008 and 2012. We cannot assume that our numbers lead directly to real change. The progressive Big Tent must continue to make room for the bread and butter issues facing American families, especially families of color. And I'll just add a personal plea on behalf of the African American community. We are in crisis, and as the Black community goes, so often the rest of the country is headed. Our middle class has been decimated. Just 50 years after the March on Washington, as I mentioned, we're still twice as likely to be unemployed. Our wealth was wiped out in a housing crisis that preyed on us and then accused us of being the cause. If anybody saw the Bloomberg cover not too long ago, that was deeply offensive. If we don't work hard to make policy issues like telecom and media, which are deeply relevant to all Americans, practical and relevant, we will not make progress. Broadband access is critical. Minority media ownership is critical. But when formerly middle-class people are losing their homes and poor people are choosing between food and medicine, our efforts to make our work real must be even more painstaking. We can't allow this to seem like a theoretical conversation when people are dealing with practical challenges. So with that, I will go back to my seat, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
All right. All right, Chanel, we're going to be talking later. Chanel's a good friend of mine, so we debate all the time. So, so Mark started off this conversation about facts and studies and how the FCC needs to do all these facts and studies and to justify whether increasing minority ownership is in the public interest or whether there is a compelling interest to, whether it even matters. This chairman is even making a case these days that maybe ownership diversity really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who owns the station. It doesn't matter if a person of color owns the station. Content's going to be the same, I guess. Somehow we have to always justify why it's the right thing, the morally right thing, but what's also good for the entire nation. I agree with what you say, Chanel, the last part we said about, if you deal with issues of race, you'll go a long way to reforming the media itself. Because we're the early warning system of what is wrong with the entire ecosystem. So, but we have to justify this. But somehow, when it comes to facts, the industry really doesn't have to justify much. It is rare that they have to justify how anything. They make up arguments all the time about how causing greater media consolidation is going to result in increase in jobs. It's going to result in greater diversity of viewpoint. These facts that are on its face, more often than not, are just, we all know what the truth is. But in DC, that's not the way the game is played. It gets justified, and all these bogus studies get done, and groups get signed on, and all this political stuff happens. And yet, they make a case that is just totally, I think in the public interest community, we make the case all the time, more often than not, of why any of these kind of mergers is really not in the public interest. But somehow we fail to prove this all the time in the Commission's eyes. We have an FCC commissioner, and Meredith Baker, who complains that the FCC was taking too long to allow the Comcast-NBC merger to happen. And then when the Comcast-NBC merger happened, she says there was too many rules and regulations that was placed on this merger. Then 4 months later, she goes work as a senior executive for Comcast. We have this revolving door. We have a capture agency that's always been. Rarely has this agency not been captured. And rarely has been like Commissioner Copps or Nicholas Johnson, who really is fighting the fight for everyday people. Somehow, it really, it's for people of color, why do we even have to make the argument that having only 3% of full power commercial television stations in the country is not a good thing? Why do we, or women make up 51% of the population, but yet own less than 7% of all broadcast media? How is that a good thing? But somehow we have to prove that increasing more minority and female ownership would be beneficial to this country. You know, if you want to look at facts, just look at the facts that, I don't know, that the media has a long history of dehumanizing a marginalized community. Media had a critical role in supporting the institution of slavery, the removal of Native Americans for tribal lands, supporting lynching, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, all these papers supporting lynching. 3,200 people lynched, 1890 to 1920. One of the first one of the first commercial radio stations licensed in 1927 was a Ku Klux Klan station, one of the most powerful stations in the South, in Washington, D.C. It was run by a paper that was owned by the Ku Klux Klan. It was an organ of the Ku Klux Klan. But somehow, this was in the public interest to give a Klan station a license. What about all the Southern broadcasters who supported Jim Crow laws and newspapers? What about that? There's a long evidence that there's been a real harmful impact when other people tell our stories. But yet, here it is, as Commissioner Cops and Chanel and others say, 2042, people of color make up a majority of the U.S. population. It already is in the largest markets. But somehow, it's not the right time. And here we have the first African-American president who, as Commissioner Cops, who in 2007 was making all the right cases and how ownership diversity was critically important. It was critically important during the Civil Rights Movement. And his chairman, who's departing, thinks, you know, is not a good idea. I mean, he actually said one time that media ownership only matters for those who are not connected to broadband. Somehow you just turn on the TV and all the coverage of people of color, how you know, if you're a Muslim, you're a terrorist, right? If you're a Latino, you're illegal. And how Jason is saying, you look at the coverage of immigration, and you're right, absolutely, no Asian Americans are rarely, no black folk, right? And you rarely get Latinos talking about immigration as well on this TV shows. Somehow it's not a good idea to say, hey, we're talking about immigration, and in their minds, we're mostly talking about those Latinos crossing the border from Mexico that pose a national security risk. But you know what? We're going to talk to the same pundits to talk about who's winning the political gamesmanship in D.C., right? It matters. Who owns the media matters. Marginalization of people matter. Now, I talked about all those incidents. There's a million of them of how the media really support racist policies, supported lynching, supported violence. And this day, you get acts of overt racism that happens from time to time that really is a reminder of how things were normally supposed to be. But the marginalization comes from either ignoring us, because ignoring us is powerful when you just don't even, Bernie said that the Brownout report, when I used to do the Brownout report in HJ, less than 1% of all network news stories are about Latinos. So if they don't exist, it is hard to deal with policy to improve the quality of life of everyday people if A, you don't cover them, and then when you do cover them, you marginalize them. So I'm gonna leave it at that. You know, I mean, it really is upsetting that we have to justify. I'm speaking, you know, issues of race, but you know, obviously this goes beyond race. Again, like Lonnie Guinier, the professor said, you know, often people of color are the canary in the coal mines. You know, when the canary in the coal mine is going to the mine and the canary dies, there's something wrong with the environment. It's time to change the toxic environment. Well, for people of color, we are often the early warning sign. The housing crisis was an early warning sign that the system was about to collapse. When you look at the inequality in our media system, you look at issues of race, and you begin to deal with those issues, how to change policy to improve the representation of people of color and influence, you begin to solve the larger problem as well, the problem for all society. So I'll leave it at that, and I want thank you again, everyone, as a staff of Free Press. Thank you for being here, and again, with McChesney's book is for free, being given out at the Free Press booth. So please get a copy. Thanks.
So I know we've got a bunch of questions and coming up here, and it's going to take me a little while to read this. But let me see if I can ask and see if I can get a brief answer from all the panelists. One sentence at most. Is this a problem of new technology? Is this a problem of money and power? Is this a problem of politics? So, where do you stand on that? Let me start with Professor Cobbs.
I guess my short answer. The short answer would be, I think it's all pretty much the same thing. Money is driving politics. Money is writing laws. Money is driving technology. So it comes down to it's a problem for our democracy. Dealing with that means you deal with money. You deal with new technology. So they serve the public interest, and you use government to make that happen.
I'll echo the same thing. I think I was a novice 3 years ago when it came to policy, and I came to this realization maybe about a year ago that it is about money. That's the interest that ultimately what it boils down to. Whether it's like the lack of Asian programming, maybe because there's just not enough large enough market, and that just doesn't justify spending the money. But yeah, basically any company who makes a policy decision, it always boils down to their bottom line, whether it will make them money or not.
Well, I think we're living through like the second Gilded Age, and essentially there's just too much concentrated power. And, you know, basically the problem of corruption in Washington is that it's legal.
Before the March on Washington, the president asked the civil rights marchers to please not march because it would cause problems and embarrass people. And the response was, we have to make you do the right thing. So I think I'll stick with my point that I said earlier. It's about money or people power, but the people power has to be so significant that it makes it not worth the money. Too many things that are happening because nobody fights. But I mean, the amount of money is so enormous that unless the people power is absolutely gigantic, we don't have a chance. And that's why I'm saying the big tent has got to get bigger and better aligned. We all have to really come together, understand one another, and be committed to long-term struggle, or there won't be change.
It's always politics. I mean, you know, throughout the history of our nation's media system, these are political decisions that are made, whether it's, you know, whether newspapers should be subsidized or whether the telegraph should be controlled by government, whether radio, you know, it was decisions made by government to put control of radio in the hands of NBC and CBS, you know, cable. You know, now we're fighting over the future of the internet, whether the internet is going to be controlled by big telecom companies deciding how we can access content online. There's nothing new about this fight. It's a political one over and over again. And it always involves big money. So a lot of money to be made from these decisions.
So here's a question. What can we do, and I'm assuming the we is the collective all of us, what can we do for relevant content and better journalism? Specific actions, realistic, doable things we can do. Bernie?
Well, I think that obviously the activism that is represented here is important, although I recognize it's a small part of America. I guess that the most important thing that people can do is they can demand better policy, but also let local media entities know how they are not serving the community. I think that would be the most important thing right now.
Yeah.
I would just also say that the diversity challenge starts at home. My experience has been, as someone who's been in the nonprofit world for a while, that the progressive community is often equally guilty to those, whoever else we want to define them, in terms of allowing people of color to speak for themselves. Very, very often, I am the only person of color in a room full of white people advocating on behalf of people of color, and that doesn't sit right with me. So if we can model from our actions, then I think that that's a practical, immediate step we can all implement.
Just to add to that, whenever we, experience some sort of hate speech in the media or someone on TV says something crazy, it's different when we, as some shop in DC, issue a press release and we call them out versus, a real community uprising in response to that. They'll listen to that. They'll listen to that when people complain, when they complain to their advertisers. So, that's one thing, if you really want responsible journalism, call them out. It doesn't have to be about hate speech. It could be about unresponsible journalism, inaccuracies and whatever they do. So, yeah, call them out. That's what they really respond to.
Mark, I was going to just say then, while you're looking for another question, that, I think what's, the problem we're facing in the telecom industry is not, it's no different than we face in all the other industries that people are fighting for reform, whether it's the banking industry or environmentalists are fighting. It is the same thing that, for a long time now, the power of corporation has really grown significantly over the past 30, 40 years, where it's where it has so much hold over our daily lives in so many aspects, and telecom is a part of it. But I just argue that being telecom policy is critically important to solve an issue. If you, like I mentioned a second ago, if you want to solve these other issues, having a democratic media system is critically important to addressing the inequalities in the environment, inequalities in the workplace, in banking, and all that stuff.
We really have to think anew and think creatively, and there's roles for all of us in that. There's roles for government, there's roles for foundations and philanthropies, there's roles for everybody in this room, and it's all kind of keyed to a basic understanding of how important media is if we're ever going to move and reform democracy. There is no reform of democracy until you have some media reform to inform the people, give them the tools that they need in order to make intelligent decisions for the future of the country. I'm convinced that there is a broad ferment for reform out there in this country. And I think it's been there for a while. And I think had media done its job back at the turn of the century, we probably never would have gotten into the mess after 2000 that we did. And even in 2008, that we would have had more of a reform agenda. It's not just reforming the media for the sake of the media, it's reforming the media for the sake of democracy. You're not going to solve the jobs problem. You're not going to solve our international competitiveness problem. You're not going to solve our education problems, our health problems, our climate problems, our lack of equal opportunity problems. You don't have a shot, not even a shot, at solving any one of those problems until you bring those issues in sufficient depth and breadth that the American people can understand them and understand how important they are. And people who are dedicated to resolving one of those issues that I just mentioned, and that's their big priority in life, have to understand not going to happen until we get a media that covers it. So I think there's work for all of us to do.
So Commissioner Copps, I've got 3 questions related for you. Why is the chairman of the FCC important? Who should we pressure to about the next chairperson of the FCC? And any idea who the next chairman is going to be?
Third, no. No more than anybody else here. It's important because the chairperson of the FCC sets the agenda, so the commissioners wait around, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be that if 2 or 3 commissioners want to put something on the agenda, that it goes on the agenda and we all debate. It doesn't work that way right now. We wait for smoke to go up, white smoke to go up from the chairman's office, that we now have an agenda item that's ready for you mere commissioners to consider. And by that time, he's pretty sure where the votes are going to be for that. So in setting the agenda, in being the spokesperson, in doing the major part of the nitty-gritty of the discussions that take place on the merger association, it's important. It could be a lot more important if the chairman would really take the commission out on the road and bring it to the attention of the American people so they know what the Commission does, and that would also help the Commission understand what the American people are thinking. But that's another problem. The second part of that was what we can do.
Who should be pressured?
Well, as I try to indicate, I think right now the pressure points the President of the United States, but I think when Congress is home right now, wonderful time to go to town hall meetings and bring up subjects that we're talking about. Just to take a minute to tell this story, back in 2003, when we were doing battle with Chairman Powell and his attempt at that time to loosen the media ownership rules so that a few media moguls could get even bigger and we'd have fewer independent family-owned companies, I think Chairman Powell and the majority there thought, oh, this is an inside the Beltway deal. Who cares about this? We'll just talk to the usual suspects, vote it, that'll be done. This isn't an issue. And my friend Jonathan Adelstein, who was the other Democratic commissioner at the time, started working with Free Press, started working with other public interest groups, Common Cause, many others. I'm not going to start naming names, and civil rights groups, liberal groups, and conservative groups, and took that matter out to the road, to town hall meetings, worked with a lot of senators and congressmen. And by the time we were through, thanks to the work of Free Press and all of those groups, 3 million people wrote to the FCC and the Congress. By then the laws had been, or the rules had been changed by the majority, but they said, hey, we don't like those. You know, when 99.99% of what we received said, we don't like those. The Senate thereupon voted twice to disapprove those rules. The House expressed its displeasure and was in the process maybe of doing more before the Third Circuit Court sent it all back. Now the new commission, or the present commission, as you know, is considering doing the same loosening again. But that summer, senators and congressmen came up to me and said, you know, I went home to a town hall meeting, and hands went up, and people asked me about media ownership. He said, I never thought media ownership was an issue. Nobody has ever brought it up. But he heard, and he came back and voted to overturn. So even in this era of outrageous money, and when so few control so much, people power, as you were saying, if it's organized, if it's vocal, if it's directed, can make the difference.
Does it necessarily follow that diversity in media ownership leads directly to diversity in media programming or content?
You know, we get that a lot, you know, and I just think that, I think the short answer is yes. I mean, so if you have, in the Supreme Court, you know, we have Clarence Thomas there. So you're saying that Clarence Thomas is not a good representation of the interests of black folks. Does that mean we should try to give up trying to get another black Supreme Court justice? You know, Bob Johnson, I think, was a terrible owner of BET. As a matter of fact, when John Malone, the cable mogul, financed Bob Johnson, the reason he chose Bob Johnson, he said he's the kind of black man who's not going to cause any trouble, right? So he literally said that. So I think, like in newsroom diversity, working in newsroom before, there are Latino journalists and black journalists in newsrooms and Asian journalists who really don't want to cover issues of race. We get pigeonholed. There's no way, if you're covering race, you're not going to be the City Hall reporter, the State Bureau reporter. But there are plenty of journalists who do want to cover that. They feel like that's part of the reason they're there, the intellectual diversity they bring. So you need a critical mass. I mean, you can't have like a savior. I mean, this is one crazy ex-reporter, telecom guy now who says, why don't just Oprah Winfrey go by broadcast stations? You know, it's like there's no single savior, like one person is going to come save. We need a critical mass of thinkers. I'm Puerto Rican. My thought and opinion from New York, coming from New York, is going to be different than Latino brothers who come from Texas. We need greater intellectual diversity, not because someone's a person of color, that means they feel a social responsibility to covering issues of color, but if you have enough a critical mass of them, surely there's going to be more than a few who are going to take that social contract responsibility seriously.
There's a book, Mark, you gave me when I first started doing this with a bunch of articles about civil rights and the Telecommunications Act that actually have some good statistics that are going to escape me at this moment, but they actually have the empirical data to show that minority ownership does lead to better representation of minorities, more minority hiring, et cetera. But I also just wanted to add to Joe's point that minority presence in organization helps to avoid painful and dangerous missteps. So again, with the example of the Bloomberg cover, did everybody see this horrendous cover that showed gross caricatures that honestly look like something from 100 years ago of African Americans and Latinos in a tree house covering themselves with money because of how we've benefited from the resurgence of the housing crisis that we caused. And the response was, our bad, we didn't realize. And that's one of those inexcusable things that shouldn't happen, but had there been some diversity in that room, which the stories indicate there was not, somebody might have said, that's not a good idea. So those types of things that are incredibly damaging, I mean, it's damaging in real world policy decisions that are being made about how people are going to be able to afford houses. Those types of things will be impacted if there is diversity in the newsroom.
So, Brenda, did you want to speak to that?
Well, I mean, I think that we should expect diversity of ownership. It certainly will cut away at concentration, which is, I think, probably the worst sin right now. Additionally, though, it's not enough. I mean, I would expect that we need pressures in other areas. We know that those things matter.
So this is for you, Bernie. So
Can I just add one thing in there?
Sure.
We know it'll make a difference because it already has made a difference, and we had the minority tax certificate. We had hundreds of stations that came into to existence, most of which are gone upon the expiration or the cancellation of that tax certificate.
If I just say, we did a study a few years ago, Free Press, that showed that black-owned radio station was less likely to have Rush Limbaugh or right-wing radio. So, there is diversity of viewpoint. They're more likely to have Tom Joyner and, on those shows.
So, Bernie, this is for you. With newspapers becoming primary source of news and investigative reporting, how can activists promote and ensure objective reporting? And this is related. So, again, how can community activists facilitate journalists to cover issues of interest?
Well, I think, first of all, I think that a lot of things that are happening with citizen journalism, crowdsourcing, et cetera, those things are really critical. There's an assumption that our folks are opposed to those things because they cut at professional journalism, but they don't in any way. They're complementary to it. I think that activists, again, should be very reactionary to the current media owners. The other thing is I think that the core of this, we talk about diversity of ownership, but we need to create ways to create any kind of new ownership. Part of the problem right now is just getting the current crop of owners sort of out of the way. And Mr. Copps just referred to tax policy. I mean, one of the problems we have, we try to pursue a number of things in Washington, but you don't dare bring anything up right now that somehow creates a credit or negatively affects tax policy. Until we create some things that are, with taxes that encourage better media and lower barriers to entry for new owners, we're going to be stuck kind of with this current crop.
Okay. What do you see as the impact of Google's attempts to provide and control broadband access in Kansas and possibly beyond? Is this more access better, or is it controlled by one company dangerous? And related, couldn't broadband be regulated as was rural electrification, telephone line access, et cetera?
Well, I'll just say, Google we'll see if they're going to build out more. I don't think so. Maybe they'll build out some more, but it's just one city, and of course that city would benefit from fiber. I think another question is that gets put Google aside is this issue of municipalities trying to build their own municipal broadband or networks, fiber networks, like in places like Chattanooga, and in efforts from industry stopping ordinary citizens from trying to create their own broadband networks in places where either the network is not good enough, so businesses leave, or they don't have any network at all. I think that is a more important question rather than Google, who has a financial interest, of course, in this. And what was the second question part of that?
So the second question was, couldn't broadband access or couldn't broadband be regulated as was rural electrical?
You know, the fight over broadband is the idea that broadband has been deregulated, and the part of the fight right now that we have that's before the courts, it's whether the FCC has authority to regulate broadband, and it was deregulated. Well, sure. I mean, the 1996 Telecom Act, we believe, called for broadband to be basically a common carrier, a place where, you know, more of an open network, like dial-up was, but that got deregulated by the FCC. So there was that attempt. You know, the internet was an open network. It was created. Its creation was an open network. When broadband came along in the 1996 Act, we believe that was the goal. But Michael Powell started the deregulation of this, and then when it came to cable, then DSL in 2005, and part of this fight over net neutrality is whether what authority does FCC have over regulating broadband, and if the FCC has the authority reclassified, I'm trying not to be too wonky, but reclassified, they can do other things to promote competition. But right now, the way it's regulated, it's hard to promote competition, so we have potentially more competitors being able to offer you internet service, be an internet service provider. And of course, the fewer providers you have, if you're stuck with a duopoly, basically, either your phone or cable company, there's more incentive for these companies to discriminate against the content that goes over their pipe. Right now, Verizon is making an argument in court that is no different than a newspaper. It should be able to edit the information, the content that flows over its pipes. Now, imagine if you win that argument in court. Do you think Verizon and AT&T should be no different than a newspaper publisher editing the content that goes over its pipes? I mean, it's a whole different world we're talking about if they're successful.
So, Jason, as a lawyer, can Congress legislate broadband the way that they legislated over rural electrification services?
Not too familiar with that part. I mean, I think it is part of the larger conversation of where things are going to be headed. I mean, the Telecom Act was written in the 90s before internet was really, you know, everywhere and ubiquitous, and, you know, broadband wasn't even existed at that point. So there's an opportunity there, and, you know, I'm sure the public will have a chance to weigh in on, you know, how all the different, you know, types of technologies right now are going to be regulated. Right now, they're all treated differently. You know, basically, they're all moving towards ones and zeros. So, you know, there will be an opportunity, but I'll leave it to Commissioner Kops for the rest.
You know, for many years, we regulated access to broadband as part of telecommunications, and then we got involved in this ridiculous semantic debate, linguistic exegesis, whatever you want to call it. Oh, this is really not telecommunications, this is an information service. And we were the only country on the face of the earth, I think, that ever short-circuited our broadband deployment by an exercise in linguistic analysis and getting into a debate like that. Would we all like to have more clarity in our legislative guidance? Would we all like to have a clearer law? Yes. Would Mike Kops like to see Congress embark upon writing a new telecommunications law this year? Absolutely not. I would tremble at the prospect of what kind of law would come out of there. I think the basic structure is there. I think we could have rested our classification of services on the present law much more effectively than we did. I think we could have based our network neutrality or open internet rules much more squarely on the strong part of the Telecommunications Act, Title II, than we did. So for my part, rather than getting sidetracked in a years-long effort to put together a new law with something for everybody, which would probably end up disserving consumers, I would just rather plow ahead and have an aggressive agency exercising the authority that I think it already has.
So I have suggested we've actually run out of time. Is that right? There was a question directed, I think, to me, which is, why hasn't the FCC done what it's supposed to do? I wish I could answer that. Are you suggesting that the two past directors and the public are responsible for these losses, because that's what I'm hearing from all politicians lately, right up to the president. And there's another question: what is the importance of conservative forces which are against media consolidations? Are they potential allies? Bernie, do you want to? I mean, are conservative forces potential allies in any of this?
I talked to a wonderful conservative gentleman here at the conference this morning. I think, again, I said, check your ideology at the gate. I think absolutely. Trent Lott played a weird role a few years ago, and we should take our help where we can find it.
And I would just ask, Joe, why hasn't the FCC done what it's supposed to do?
There's a lot of money to be made. This is a capture agency. A lot of the staffers and the former commissioners, they go in to work for the industry they regulate. It's no different than banking. How come there's no one been arrested in the banking industry? Because they're all former part of Wall Street. They're part of, and so it's this revolving door that's true of so many federal agencies that regulate whatever industry. I think that's part of the problem. And there has been change. There has been media reform movements. It's not new. There was reforms efforts in 1920s, the 1960s. This whole civil rights movement worked with citizens groups to change laws that that gave local citizens greater leverage over holding their broadcasters accountable to serving their news and information needs. And that got chipped away in the 80s where Reagan came along. So so we have to continue to. This is a critical fight. We have to continue to struggle in trying to hold our regulators accountable. I definitely agree with Chanel at times that it is sometimes it's not the first issue people think about, like reclassification of broadband from a Title II to Title I service, but it's critically important to our democracy. So it's always a challenge. I think at Free Press, that's what we try to do. We try to make this relevant to everyday citizens. And I also say, going to a prior point, that I think it's important. We get along. That's fine. We can all get along, right? And I think we're supposed to try to all work together. But I also think we need to challenge each other. And I think that it's okay for groups out, Free Press that we work with to challenge Free Press on how we have the right strategy or not, or as a person of color, challenging my civil rights colleagues on whether they have the right, they're making the right decisions or not. There's nothing new about challenging each other to better each other, to make, like the immigration fight. There's a big fight between the Latino communities between whether comprehensive immigration reform is really comprehensive, and whether outside activist groups are challenging traditional civil rights. I think it makes everyone better, and we've always had these fights, struggles, debates, and it's a good thing. I think when people challenge Free Press, I think it makes us a better organization to say, are we we're in DC too much, we hear the DC chatter, we're in DC, I work in DC, are we making the right decisions, based on short-term, long-term, are we pigeonhole ourselves in what we think is possible? So we continue, the fact that this conference was born out of Robert McChesney, and a book that he wrote was the seed that led to an organization like ours, shows that good ideas can come from a lot of different places.
So last words, very, very quickly.
I just wanted to make the point one more time that it's in addition to holding our leaders accountable, we need to support the ones that are doing what we want, and we also need to help out the ones that are on the fence. I think one thing that's very challenging is there's a lot of issues. We're a nonpartisan organization, but there's a lot of issues where we know we're not going to get any Republican support. But the problem is, in many cases, we're not going to get any Democrat support. So part of it is, and I'll go back to an experience I had with a congressman that I won't name, where there was legislation going around that I think I had talked him into supporting. I think this was probably LPFM. And the broadcasters from the district came in and made were 100% clear there would be no coverage for his campaign if he signed. So, this is the type of climate in which our government's leaders are operating, and we need to put them in a position where they can have the cover of saying, look, I have no choice. My constituents are going to be irate if I don't respond. And so when we have a commissioner who is standing up for what we want them to do, like Commissioner Copps. We have to make sure that he's well protected. The commissioners that are still there that are doing the right thing, they need to be well protected. We can't just say, okay, they're good, they've got it under control, we don't have to worry. They need the constituency to be just as strong as those who are not with us.
So final words, very quickly, Brian.
Final word is that I would say that we can and should expect media to reflect the diversity of American culture. It has to. But where the current structures don't serve us, we should work to replace them.
Thank you. Jason?
Great. I mean, just quickly about why the FCC hasn't done enough. I mean, part of it is just the system and the laws that we have in place that require the government to really be careful about dealing with things, especially when it comes to race. You have to have a really damn good reason to use it in the first place, and then you have to have a lot of studies to back it up. Unfortunately, these laws have been around for a long time, and yet it's been well over a decade, and the FCC has still not acted on getting some of these studies done to really address the issues that we talked about today. I think that's where it really talks about the importance of the community really holding our leaders accountable, whether it's people on the Hill or at the FCC or even the president. We got to hold them accountable.
Maybe one reason the FCC doesn't do what it's supposed to do is that not enough people know what the FCC does. So I think the charge for this group then is to take that message back home when you leave here and explain that this isn't just a little backwater agency, even though it's not written about that much. It's making decisions that are central to the future of democracy, to the ability to reform this system, to give everybody a voice, to take all of these wonderful technologies we have right now and turn them into what should be a golden age of communications rather than what we're dealing with right now.
So final word for me is, I don't know how many years we are after 9/11. We still don't have a national emergency broadcast system in place. We still don't have a way for emergency workers or public safety workers to communicate with each other about natural disasters. We still don't have a way to communicate about very basic things in our society. And frankly, we don't have a good understanding of how our local media ecologies, ecosystems work, and the role that newspapers play. We have some hints of that, but we really haven't done the work to figure it out. I would say the reason that the FCC has not done the job that it's supposed to do is in part because people don't understand how important the FCC is, but it's also because we are distracted, overworked, underfunded in our lives, that we are becoming poorer while the rich are becoming richer, that we're not focusing on the importance of communication that we need to focus on so that we can, in a democracy, change policies and make policies that make a difference. The old story about Roosevelt being, if you want me to do something, make me do it. One reason the FCC is not doing what we want it to do is because we haven't made the FCC do it. Thank you. I'm doing great. How are you? Thank you. Thank you.